So we're delighted to be here today, and our goal is to offer some perspective and thoughts on how to help prepare the next generation for leadership, so we can evolve our efforts to make sure that we are representative in our leadership at the corporate, nonprofit, and you name it level. I am joined by three deeply experienced and super interesting panelists who I will allow them to introduce themselves. I couldn't do them justice. And then we are going to jump into a couple questions that they will each respond to, and we are going to hold about 15 minutes at the end for your questions and their responses. So with no further ado, Annabel.
Testing? Okay, perfect. Hi, I'm Annabel Chang. I am the Director of Public Policy for Lyft, the ride-sharing company. So what I do at Lyft actually is I oversee our political policy and regulatory strategy for regions basically ranging from Chicago all the way to Hawaii, which keeps me very, very busy. Just as context, when I first joined Lyft about 2.5 years ago, there was only one state that had passed legislation regarding ride sharing, and that was in Colorado. By now, it's close to 40 states. So it's kept me really, really busy over the last 2.5 years. Prior to this, I was at the San Francisco District Attorney's Office as a prosecutor. I also worked at a big law firm downtown. But in a past life, which is what's led me to politics again, is I used to work for Senator Dianne Feinstein on Capitol Hill and in Sacramento with the State Assembly. The context of all of this is that those are very white male-dominated professions. So I've learned a lot from that experience, and I'm excited to share some observations and some learnings.
Good morning. My name is Anna Mock. I am a partner at Deloitte. I'm currently part of our advisory practice, which is one of the largest consultative practices focused on strategic risks, financial, and governance matters for our clients. I also spend now about half my time for that practice and for audit practice leading our China and Southeast Asia efforts. So doing a lot of work global, traveling around the world, talking to clients about some of these global issues. And this discussion of leadership is front and center in my mind. In addition to my work life at Deloitte, I spend a lot of my, I'll call free time, or extra thinking time, thinking about how Asian Americans can advance. When I started at the firm in the late 80s, there were always, even at that time, similar to the law firms, a fair amount of Asians. But when I got promoted to partner, I was the first Chinese American partner in the largest part of the business to ever get promoted. And so while it's something to celebrate, it's actually something that saddens me. And actually, that's not necessarily that our firm's probably one of the most progressive out of the industry and all the other firms. And while there's a lot more Asians, and our dear friend Shark kind of gave some of the stats in some of the other industries, it's very similar in my industry. I work around the corporate suites all the time, meeting with clients. And it's still not uncommon for me to be either the only person of color or the only Asian or the only Asian female in the corporate boardroom or walking around, those executive suites. And that's actually true even in tech companies, even in this side. We always think that it's actually a little bit different, and it's only a big company set of issues, but I actually see that even in Silicon Valley and as we look at companies, and spend a lot of time thinking about why that is and what we can do to change that. I have a 16-year-old daughter who's a junior in high school, so it's in particular a very personal matter for me because I want the world to be a bit different for her when she's in the workforce and when she's my age, right? And I'm not always so confident it's going to be significantly different for her in a couple of decades, and I think we all have to do something in order to change up what the world looks like in the future.
Thank you. My name is Stephen Ma. I was appointed by the Assembly Speaker to serve as a commissioner on California Commission on Asian Pacific Islander American Affairs. It's pretty a lengthy title. What we do is we do hearing and we advise the governor and also advise the legislature with legislation or execution of laws or passing of bill regarding to Asian American, Pacific American Islanders. And there are 14% of which are in California falls under that category. Now my day job, I'm a founder and CEO of ThinkTank Learning. It is an education company that specializes in helping middle and high school students achieving their academic goals. pursue their career in life. And we currently serve 12,000 students in the Bay Area, 98% of which are Asian American. And we have 3 offices in China, and also own and operate 3 nonprofit high school, American high school in China as well. So hopefully, I'm honored and gratifying to be here, to be invited here to serve, and also to share my perspective. Thank you.
Thank you all. You can see how impressive this group is. We're going to start off with the first question, which is, how do we prepare the next gen for leadership? What are your current thoughts that really speak to how you're looking at the future and either your lived professional experience? We'd love to hear about that.
I think the very first step is actually what the Asia Society is doing, is bringing awareness. I think the numbers that were being shared, especially by Medtronics and some of the numbers from the Asia Society survey, are really important to keep in mind. What a shocking number to know that, for example, you have a predominantly Asian workforce or a predominantly female workforce, a predominantly whatever group it may be, but is not represented in the executive branch, essentially, of the company. I think that is the number one first thing, and it's easy to kind of essentially dust it under the rug if you don't know the numbers. And I think that even if the companies that are participating maybe they are inclined to actually have larger participation numbers than other Fortune 500 companies, the fact that we can actually cite those numbers is pretty critical. So one first step that I'm going to certainly try to strive for is get executive buy-in to participate in these types of surveys. And hopefully my colleagues at Lyft, these are numbers that it's important for us to think about and remember. So I think the number one step is awareness so that you can't ignore it.
I think we've talked about some of the companies. I guess I'll focus a little bit of what should be the mindset. I mentioned I have a 16-year-old. Our firm hires a lot of people, right, coming out of college. One of the things that's a little different, and I was an immigrant, so I grew up kind of my parents telling me I was different, and I knew I was different, and I'd have to work harder and be different. I'm not always convinced, people coming out of university, and that's actually not a bad thing. They don't come out thinking they're going to be, whether you want to be burdened or impacted by race necessarily, right? They come out, and it's actually a good mindset. They go into the workforce quite often thinking it's all equal, right? And they go in there with the swagger of it's all equal. And then something happens along the way, whether it's some of the behavioral things that we've talked about earlier that may be a little bit not fully aligned in companies and how people interact that some of the earlier panels talked about, or coupled with some of the biases of decision makers, then it is actually, they are a little bit different then. It's very obvious when we go through evaluation processes as we look at advancement that they are different. But I think the individual still thinks, oh no, it's all good. I can do this, I can work harder, I can do all these things. So I think first is we have to figure out how to have the conversation with the next generation leaders, not to be burdened by the fact that we're Asian Americans or we're people of color, but how to really use that to our advantage and use all those things, all those cultural values and all those soft skills that we have, whether it's humility, all those things, they actually have a place in the workplace. So telling them not to do that is actually not the right answer. It's figuring out how do they use that to their advantage and how do they turn it on and off and supplement that with other skills that allow them to be heard and allow them to be respected and allow them to be seen as strengths. So I think we have to kind of have that dialogue in a way. And I don't think talking to them as a older person saying, that happened to me and you should have that same experience is the right answer. You really have to kind of come at it from the mindset of someone who grew up in a slightly different time and has a different set of experiences. But then at the moment when they start seeing some of these differences, having them recognize that, I have to kind of shift a little bit behaviorally, and then that's going to help me get to the next level. So that's one of the things I really focus a lot on in the coaching and mentoring when I work with some of our professionals and people outside of my firm.
I think we don't have to argue the fact that we all know that Asian American has a disproportionately low representation in the executive leadership field across all disciplines. Data has shown it, and they've done great survey. The interesting thing is Asian American is the fastest growing minority in the United States now. Actually, we have more immigrants. We beat Hispanics in terms of number of immigrants coming, total number of immigrants coming, I think, since 2009. And we have the highest education level, the highest household income. But if you divide the earning power of Asian American by the number of education in terms of years, we have the lowest number of earning power per education year invested. And that is interesting. Everything, I believe in causality. Everything, there's a cause. And if you don't have to really look far, you don't have to really have to look outward, you just look inward. What do Asian parents teach their children at home? Asian parents teach their children to behave, to don't go out of your boundary, to don't take risk, and take stable job. Of the 12,000 Asian students that I have in the Bay Area, the biggest fight that I heard between parents and children are that they cannot agree on what the children want to do in the future. I mean, the worst nightmare that parent can hear is, oh, my son wants to major in art. Come on, I'm not gonna send you to college you major in art. Go to a Fisherman's Wharf, see what the artists are doing, right? So yeah, it's a taboo if you, as an Asian student, and we're talking about next generation leaders, and these students are gonna be our next generation leaders in 20 years, in 25 years. But if they are trained and indoctrinated to just work in their boundary, don't get out of your comfort zone. You can only, as my student, most of the time, I would say 90% of the time, they're being taught by their parent to either major in biochemistry, basically medicine, go to be a doctor, and that's well respected, or you go to be a lawyer, or you be an engineer. That's it. No, absolutely no English major, right? Because the Asian parent like to say, "You're not even white. Who's going to read your book?" Right? So coming out of that, we don't really have to change outside. It's the mentality, it's the children's identity that they're associated with. When children graduate from high school, go into college, identify themselves with engineers, lawyers, and maybe doctors. They don't have this, naturally, they won't have the soft skill that's required to be leaders.
And Steve, I actually want to highlight that because I think that is one of the most important factors. And this is actually, one of the things that I did not realize growing up was how important the skill of communication is, both written and oral. And so I barely fit into the millennial category, but I'll keep the hat on for the time being. And my realization was that the skill of public speaking is absolutely one of the most vital skills ever, and it actually can be trained. It can absolutely 100% be trained. So if you look at some of the great orators, you'll see, like in the early days, that they are kind of stumbling all over the place. They start with ums, uhs, that kind of thing. But over practice, with lots of practice, they can improve that. So one physical thing you can take away is actually the best thing I learned, and I'm going to do this afterwards, is actually watch footage of yourself. So if you have the opportunity, let's say you're giving a wedding toast, right? Just have a friend, film you, and just watch what weird tics you may have, the tendencies you may have, and train it out. And you can look for those public speaking opportunities, whether it's on boards, whether it's in your community group, whether it's at church, whether it's in your youth group, that kind of thing. I think those are really important opportunities that we often forget. And those were critical for me to develop my public speaking skills, and I continue to work on them.
I think the other things related to what both speakers have said is this concept of advocacy. Advocacy at an individual level and advocacy at a community level. And that is one of the things that is also teachable and trainable, right? I do feel good that I think the schools, right, are teaching children, especially if they're going to a good school, around how they can speak up for themselves and advocate and tell their story and fight for whatever it is, right? You go fight for the class, go fight for the job, go fight for X. And that's how it is in the workplace, right? We have to advocate for that promotion. And to do that, you got to be able to tell your story, but you have to be comfortable to advocate and be comfortable with that. And I think sometimes we don't. right? I think it's uncomfortable for women to do that. I think it's typically uncomfortable for people of color, and it's definitely uncomfortable if that's not an environment that you're accustomed to. And then the community has to advocate, and those of us in the workplace, and I feel very strongly about this. I feel it's almost my obligation, and it's a privilege that I work in a firm, and I can also interact with clients and interact with other companies, and I can advocate and educate on some of these issues and share some of the statistics and talk about these topics. Because if we don't do that, I can't expect that white male that actually may have it in their intention, but that's not their experience, to advocate for me only, right? They can help, but I gotta be willing to do that, and the rest will follow. So this whole concept of advocating in a way, I'm not saying protest, I'm saying advocate in a way that's very appropriate for the environment is something we actually have to teach the millennials and next generation. Many of us, I still work on that myself every day, because it is not natural for me to do that.
And it's a little bit about a state of being uncomfortable, right? Being okay with being uncomfortable. If you are expressing an opinion that is divergent from the rest of the group, and whether it's a business meeting or whatever, you just have to be confident in yourself and just practice that, signaling that you want to speak up.
So again, I think maybe because I'm an educator, so I like to see the thing from the root. So we're here to try to make a change. All of us here, the seminar, the function, we're here to make a change. So rather than, it's great that we can do, policy, it's great that we can do program. But I'm just asking each of you, because either you are already a parent or you're going to be a parent. So when you have your Asian children, think about it. Is it okay if he asks you, I want to major in art? Say that. If you say no, then it's a hypocrisy. How can we change the stereotype and the status quo when you yourself does not allow that risk-taking, does not allow that changing? What do you say when your child tells you, hey, I want to be a comedian, I want to be a rapper, So seriously, this is how we change. If we can change 12,000 minds in 20 years, there will be 12,000 leaders in different fields. We were talking about soft skill, that is going to be shared, that's common amongst success across all disciplines. It's not just, to be a politician, it's not just this public speaking skill that Annabel is talking about. It's not only necessary to be a leader in the business world, but it's also necessary to be a leader in Hollywood, to be a leader to speak out, right? So I think everything, what I do, at least what I try to do, is try to convince the parent of my student that it's okay for them to major in literature. It's okay for them to major in history. It's okay for them to major in film, because actually, labor of statistics says that Americans on average change their career 7 times in their lives. Seven times. Career change, not job change, career change. So, and 90% of the time, we do not do what we learned when we were in college anyway. So it's okay to explore more, interdisciplinary learning. It's okay to major in art. So I think with that, Asian has the hard skill already. It's built in their culture, right? You have to go to Kuma when you're young. You have to practice arithmetics. So we have that analytical skill. We need to be given the okay to explore our soft skill. I think that's what it is.
Great, thank you. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about mentoring and learning to advocate and looking for mentors, maybe for a second. It's a question that if you are working in an organization where you feel that you are one of a few, and that others may not have your shared lived experience or professional experience, where do you turn for mentors? Where do you turn for advice and counsel at those crucial moments in your career?
Wherever you can. So one of the interesting things, so the observation I had early in my career was working in politics and in the law, was that very few people in leadership who were the decision makers looked like me, period.
Right.
And so what I tried to do was observe, watch them in action, and see what skills did they pick up, what qualities do they have that helped get them into that position. And I always did the really annoying thing of asking 1 million people for coffee, and maybe they can't have a coffee, maybe they can just walk with me down the hall from this office to the next. But hopefully I could glean a bit of information from that. But what was most important for me was, even if the leadership looked different, I was observing exactly what it is that they were doing. So what I saw was that they had a comfort in asking hard questions. Maybe people tend to react more positively if you're in a tough meeting, rather than sharing your opinion, which is what I'm doing now, but sharing your opinion, but asking actually the questions to get to the understanding. People are much more receptive to questions being asked rather than opinion being shared. And once you've established your curiosity, your intellectual depth, and then you share your opinion, I think that's a little different. So those are some things I just kind of picked up in my observations along the way. Granted, I was working in politics and the law, which is a slightly different world, but those are things that I have incorporated in my own daily life.
I like your concept of wherever you can. I do agree with that. And I've actually shifted my thinking on this concept of mentoring over time. When I was younger in my career, I believe there was that one person or one or two people, right, that I needed to really work on. And as I've gotten more experience, I actually see it as a lifelong of a series of a community of people you build around you that it's mutual. So I'm giving them something, meaning either I'm teaching them what it's like to be me, and they're teaching me other things, and it's very fluid in terms of us learning from each other. So if you're a person seeking a mentor, you have to keep that in mind, right? People don't keep giving you mentoring if they're not getting anything from it. So you have to think, what are you doing for that individual? Two, I think the reason I kind of look at it as a community is I think people are always open with advice, but that advice has to come at the right time when you're willing to most need it. So I now focus so much more on not necessarily just focusing on a couple of people, but if I see something that someone, even if I just met you, but I like you and I trust you, that I think you can benefit from that, I'll find a way to tell you, whether it's, hey, maybe that's not the right thing to wear, or maybe you could have said it this way. And I would appreciate the same, right? I ask my friends to do the same. If they see me here after today and think I should have said this instead or positioned it this way because it would be better heard and received, I appreciate that advice as much as spending an hour with someone. And so I seek out and I give that type of advice and mentoring in a different way. And then there's a broad range of people, right? Because there's not going to be exactly another person that's just like me, and nor is another person that I can say, I wouldn't want to clone of myself, frankly. That wouldn't be very good. And so, but there could be aspects of what I do that someone can learn from, and aspects of someone else that looks completely different than me that I can benefit from.
I really think that we are all mentor to someone. We are all mentee to someone, and it starts from here. Okay, it's especially sad for Asian American to have a dearth of mentor because we don't have that role model. In Hollywood, we look around. One of the movie star, there's no Asian male movie star other than from Asia, right? If I look into in the NFL, there's no Asian American male NFL player. It's just there's dearth of role models. So I really think we should start from somewhere, and it really start from us. If you're a 30-year professional, you're probably a mentor to a high school student or college student. If you're a 50-year executive, you're probably a mentor to a 30-year professional, right? So we all have to take a active role of helping another person grow. If in your life you can help 5 people grow, and then 50 years later, this will multiply 25 times. So that's I think just basic. Be a mentee, be a mentor. You can always find people you can learn. You can always find people who can learn from you.
Thank you.
Can
go ahead.
I share one thing? So I did bring a prop up here. I warned Laurie.
Love props.
And this is actually what a one-time mentor gave me as a tip. And it's and I actually have shared it since in going when I was asked to speak at my law school to 1Ls, was this book. It's called Brag. Exclamation mark. And what it is something that I never grew up with, which was speaking about my accomplishments in a competent and confident way. And this book, I loved it because it has very specific steps. But what I realize now, especially in my professional career, is learning to speak about my accomplishments over time. and in the right setting. And whether it's to my manager, whether it's to my, the C-suite executives, whether it's to a counterpart, whether it's to opposing counsel, I want to make sure that people hear about it, because you never know where your next job may be from, your next appointment may come from, your next invitation to join a board may come from. But people won't know about it if you don't talk about it. So this is one of the best pieces of advice that I ever received from a mentor, and I share that little gem with you.
Yeah, I think one of the things to add is around this concept of networks. We haven't really touched on it much, but there's so many networks that we can be a part of, right? I mentioned I spend a lot of time looking at the advancement of Asians in corporate, so I started organizations like Ascend here in Northern California, and it's a national organization where it's professionals looking to advance. And so in that body of folks, we look at pipeline, we look at how we support each other in terms of corporate and company advancement. But Otto's part of the Leaders Forum, which is, he can talk a little bit more about that, but that's around political pipeline, and that's a network of people who want to get political appointments, right? And you go down the pathway, there's others for nonprofit and other things. So those networks are so critical, because you never know, again, who's going to be in what seat that's going to be able to influence something for you, right? Because you want to be top of mind. And not only inside your company, but outside of. Otto, maybe you can talk. I know you could have talked about it earlier, but just a little bit about Leaders Forum, too.
So this is a group that was formed by Lorna and her husband, Wade. Lorna is actually on the White House initiative for the Asian. And even though this group might change, whatever, with the change of administration, the idea is that we're trying to promote not just the political side, but try to find talents in the Asian community, from education, from art, from business and C-suites, to try to get them involved in the political scene. Because a lot of times people don't want to do politics for so many reasons. We are in our comfort zone in the corporate structure. You're very successful as VP, director, senior VP. But that's the type of talent we need to get into the administration. And in some ways, corporate and government seems to have a wall that people don't really connect very well. In the Leaders Forum, one of the goals is to try to make that connection to bring these talents and try to find these people who might be afraid of or not interested to serve, to introduce them what opportunities out there. And it's a non-profit bipartisan organization. It's not about Democrats or Republicans. Even though when it comes to numbers, there might be a bit more Democrats and Republicans in the group. At the end of the day, whether it's a Democratic or Republican administration, we want to have those group of seasoned, ready to serve Asian executives and leaders in our community to be presented to the next administration, whoever that might be, so that we could be at the position. That at the end of the day, right, it's going to help the Asian community as a whole.
And so the concept that there are actually a lot of organizations looking at next generation leader pipelines, right, across different disciplines, and asserting yourself into those networks, contributing to those networks is really important, right? It's important for the community, and it will be very beneficial for you. And you learn so much from that. And some of the people in these networks may not exactly be like you, but actually that's a good thing.
Maybe I want to comment on that. One of the things, we sit here as a search firm, and I would say most executive search firms are still developing their dialogue about diversity and inclusion, even the global. And the conversation, I think, has become, thankfully, much more sophisticated and deeply urgent. And I think one of the things I would also recommend is, if a search firm calls you, talk to them. Doesn't matter if you want the role or not, get on their radar. There are lots of different ways people get hired, and search firms are typically at the CEO level and their direct reports, or maybe VP level. But just start a dialogue. Get on people's radars. One of the things we're pushed at by our clients, and rightly so, and this is an issue I am deeply passionate about, if I want to have an impact on the world and we can do it this way, fantastic. We're pushed to say, when we're asked constantly, please make sure that our candidate pool is diverse. And when we're asked to do that by our organizations, we shouldn't be scrambling to find people. We should already have had a series of networks that we can tap into with deeply talented people whether they're right for a job then or not. So my advice, unsolicited, but I'll put it in there, is start to build those connections. We're here to represent the market to our clients, and you're the market. So one question, and I want to be mindful of time, but we've got a bit more time. Is there something different that, and you may be the most representative, all due respect, is there something different that this next gen needs in terms of thinking about leadership that those of us who are trying to help to advance need to be thinking about? And I say that as we sit in this cool office and this incredibly successful company. Curious if you all have a perspective because you've experienced it trying to help people, or you are one. And I'm sure those of you in the audience will have some thoughts in our Q&A on that.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
So yeah, actually, if you look at the demographic of Asian American, it's very peculiar. We have more population, we have more proportion of our population being the first generation immigrants than native born. And that is actually very peculiar. So 30 years ago, the demographic of Asian American 30 years ago was very different than the demographic of right now. And we have the highest because, and 75% of all first generation Asian American immigrants have college or higher degree, higher degree. So this is very different than any other immigrant group or any other minority group. So, and if you study sociology, I mean, they will tell you, first generation immigrant worried what the most? Survival, fitting in, right? So first generation immigrant do not come here to really pursue an ideological dream. They come here to survive. So there's a fear of not making it in the society. And that fear is passed down to the first generation born offspring right away. And that's why we're bounded by this dogma of you can't do this, you can't do that, you have to do this. It takes usually 3 to 4 generations before that dogma is relaxed, that restraints relaxed. Okay, go be a rapper. Okay, go be a politician. I mean, look at all the Asian American politicians in the scene right now. They're all 3rd or 4th generation Asian American. It's really hard to find first generation politician. First generation immigrant who become politician because they have this dogma to survive. So I think as what can we do for the next generation that's different from the last generation? So I myself was born in Taiwan. I came here when I was 11, so I'm the first generation, right? So I take it an active, conscious preaching to my children, say, hey, you can really become whoever you want to be. My son really was into McQueen when he was 4, okay? So, and my wife really asked me, because I'm an educator, my wife's asking, are you okay if your son doesn't go into Ivy League and people are going to look weird on you? So, okay, if you want to be a car fixer, go be a car repair person. Just be the best way you can be. So I think we really need to relax that dogma of you can only do this or that. Otherwise, it's really hard I love the networking idea, but if I've been told by my parents that I can't do this or that, when all of a sudden I graduate from college at 22 years old, I'm not going to be naturally go seek for a mentor. I'm not going to be able to brag about myself because I've been taught to stay humble, right? To hide my merit. So therefore, I need to read a book about bragging myself. So my advice to foster the next generation Asian American really is to relax this generation's mind, to liberate this generation's mind, so we don't continue the momentum of restraint and dogma to our next generation.
My observation has been for the millennial group is that we are very, very conscious of personal brand, but not very conscious of professional brand. So what I mean is, people are very, very active on Snapchat, on Instagram, take selfies all over the place. You'll be standing at the subway and you'll be watching someone take a selfie. But that level of activity and consciousness actually doesn't permeate the professional workplace and the brand that you are establishing there. So a lot of people tend to be pretty anonymous, right? They're 23, 24 in the workplace, and they're totally anonymous, and they aren't participating in leadership opportunities. And that, I think, is a neglected opportunity. So what is one thing that has been really important to me at Lyft is actually helping to cultivate some of the younger college grads on my team, some of the people that are a few years out, and having them think about their professional brand. doing a little bit of community activism, engaging in the community, writing a blog post, making sure that their Twitter or their Snapchat isn't unfriendly or hostile to their future professional brand. So those are things that I would just say is that, the level of commitment that we have to our personal brand, I hope that you can actually relay that to your professional brand.
So I'm hearing just two things. One is be aware of how you present yourself, and as someone who works for a search firm, I would agree. And the second thing is leadership can be learned. And one of the things I think that is interesting living in San Francisco in the Bay Area is that the bias against youth has relaxed in terms of watching people found companies, but the need to learn how to lead still exists, even if you've been enormously successful. And I have that question of, there's a presumption you already know, but there are probably lessons that need to be learned along the way.
I mentioned this in our prep. I think about this concept of technology a lot, and whether technology actually helps us as a community, especially from a career context, or it actually hurts us. I'm not conclusive. It depends on the day and the examples I'm seeing. But a couple of things I do know, back to Annabel's point, this whole brand becomes even more so in the world of technology. And in the workplace, while technology, and I think this is where millennials are probably need to shift their thinking. They believe it's more of a meritocracy than ever, right? Because now technology neutralizes perhaps the need for this personal communication, but actually it's the shift of that. Now, because of technology, you no longer sit down the hall from your boss or your supervisor. So there is a very limited opportunity for you to build a true, deep relationship with that person, for them to see you outside of that one time you're presenting to X, or that one interaction, right? Because everything else is virtual, or whoever your team is somewhere else. So while, the technology enabled you, right, at a certain level, kind of everything equal, it actually creates, in some ways, less opportunity to have that human-to-human interaction where someone can, okay, well, you didn't do it so well that time. Tomorrow I'll see you do it again and you'll do it better and it's okay, right? It may be another month before you actually have whether it's a live interaction with the same people. And so taking advantage of that, whether it's ability to work on your brand or to do some of these other things that are really important from a career standpoint, actually, in some ways, there's fewer opportunities and it's more competitive to take advantage of that time and opportunity. So that's where I think technology, we really need to think about it, how to use it to our advantage.
So a final question for all of you, and then we'll turn it to the group, is what programs, if I'm an employer sitting in this audience and I want to help, what kind of programs have you seen that have been particularly successful or provocative in the right sense, or what kind of experiences would you suggest employers help people get?
So I have a few examples from Lyft that I've really enjoyed. One is they've started doing female director training. And so one of the things that we had was through a company called Life Labs, we had presentation training. And they had all kinds of tips and tricks on how to make your presentation more compelling. And you had to practice over and over and over again in a full day session. And that was the first time I'd ever had a company actually dedicate the time to have people give me feedback like that, honest feedback. And it's not like, thanks, Annabelle, that was great, but you're my colleague, so I'm not gonna piss you off. It was actually true, genuine feedback with the goal of improving my presentation skills, right? So that was one. I think one thing that our company is doing today is actually hosting Toastmasters at Lyft for women. And I think that's remarkable. I think that is one great opportunity. We're inviting them in to talk about what the Toastmasters training can do. The third thing that I love is we often host high school students or junior high students at the company, and you are never more confident than when you're talking to a bunch of high school students and junior high students about what you do, because obviously you are more senior. And so in that opportunity, I'd love to have the 20-year-olds, the 25-year-olds go and talk about what they do and practice their public speaking skills, practice answering questions, practice being viewed as a leader. And so those are three things that I've identified as being really helpful.
So a couple observations on programs. There is some startling trend in larger companies that Asians are no longer considered minorities. So there's this concept of underrepresented minority, right? Because there's so many kind of going into companies at the junior level, and the Asians themselves maybe don't want to identify with being, quote, different. And so that actually does, why it's important is then it impacts, and that may be true, in politics and other, it impacts actually the amount of money and the amount of funding that will go into certain programs that the Asian Americans in companies can take advantage of. So I'd encourage those of you that are in companies that think that way to really ask for and advocate for the programs, because the trend is kind of fewer perhaps programs around, that is very specifically, let's say, targeted for Asian Americans. Second thing is I've seen also, again, this is where it's from us, many Asian Americans actually aren't even taking advantage of the programs that the company has, whatever it is, whether it's a speaking program or the networks, because whether it's I don't have time for that, I'd rather go and work on hang out with my friends and kind of work on that, or I'm a good enough communicator and I don't need that. So I would say most companies, big and small, should have a lot of programs, and most of them are pretty well vetted, right? And they're good. Toastmaster, Ascend does programs for our corporate clients. Deloitte has a ton of programs, but as a community, we're not necessarily asking for the programs or participating. And if we don't do that, and we're not, the companies are saying, well, we spent the money, no one took advantage of it, they're going to cut it off very quickly.
If you quantify it, actually, it's like if you spend a full day session taking this, professional development course, you will likely make $10,000 more next year. I think most people would show up.
Right.
But it's actually not usually framed that way.
No, exactly. And actually, you got to believe, right? I think if you are waiting for the company to quantify for you why you need to do something, something's not right in your mindset, right? We as individuals need to be willing to invest the time, whether that's a weekend time or our own money, to do it. And it's not, I think it's amazing that American corporate culture, the companies are making so much investments, more than others. If you go to other places around the world, they do not spend the amount of energy or money, and you know this from your clients, on these development programs. So, but we have to kind of take ownership and that responsibility. We can't kind of wait for the companies or the government or others to do it for us. And as individuals, we have to do that. And I think that's something we have to also ask the millennials to do. We do it all in our personal lives. We have to do it in our professional lives too.
Stephen, you want to wrap up, and then we'll move to questions from the audience?
Sure. So I'm an employer at Bay Area. We employ about, we're a small company, 350 people roughly. But even at that, we have programs that help people communicate in public speaking, especially important for teachers and educators. So two programs that you can, as an employer or executive employer, that you can consider. One is you can always go find executive coach, right? A personal coach. I actually just met Steve from Sato. I was inspired by what he does. I might become his client. So that's more expensive though, but there are some less expensive program like Stanford Continuing Education. They have program in public speaking. They have program in presentation, in entrepreneurship. They have programs in making project management. Short program like 2 weeks, 8 weeks, and they don't cost a lot. They cost like anywhere from $800 to $1,500. So what I used to do, I encourage my employee. It's against the law to ask them to do it, otherwise you have to pay them overtime. I encourage them to do it, and they can come back and that's the Asian of me, to redeem their tuition if they get a B or higher. So that's what I do.
Great. So at this point, we would love to turn it over to the audience. And one request is that when you ask your question, please stand up and speak into the mic wherever that is. And if you want to identify yourself, that would be even better. We've got one back there who's been patient. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Buck G. I'm an advisor to the Asian Society. So just a quick statement. So what I take from what I heard was that in terms of developing next generation millennial Asians, they're screwed. Because there are programs that exist for networking, for presentation, whatever, but no one's taking advantage of it. The reason they're not taking advantage of it is because you said their parents are telling them soft skills are irrelevant. So we're screwed. Or sorry, they're screwed. So what can you do to change that? What can companies do to get people to understand that it's more important? What can they do to encourage more people to get in these programs if they exist? As you said, Anna, they come and no one signs up because they don't think it's important. And as long as they have that cultural background, they're not going to sign up by themselves. So what can you do differently that's not being done now? Because clearly what's happening now is not working.
Well, so I'll start since I made that comment. And I know Buck, and so he always asks those really tough questions. So I'll take one for the team here. I actually think if they're screwed, we're screwed, right? Because we're reliant on the millennial and the next generation leaders, so we cannot let that continue to happen. I actually do think the companies, one of the things they can do is make sure clearly the culture and the environment is such where it isn't a negative, right? It's a positive. It's viewed as I'm investing in you. So you should take advantage of this, and everyone has developmental needs or has strengths to work on. And so if you create a company culture where that's really the case, and it's proven out that the programs, the more programs you participate in, the more you will be more successful and make that extra $10,000. That's great. But I do really believe, and this is something I do stress for my daughter. I failed as a Chinese mom. My daughter does not play an instrument. She does not like science. She plays sports, and she loves K-pop, and she listens to whatever, and she worked till 5 a.m. because she did not manage her time. So clearly I'm not the greatest classical Chinese mom, but she's doing okay, I guess. But the point is that I think as individuals, she has to, we have to go and believe that we have some advantage and we will contribute fully and even kind of carry beyond our weight in our companies. But to do that, we're gonna need to work on something. So I think as individuals, and I really harp on this because as an employer, the companies can only do so much. And they are doing a lot, right? I'm not saying they're doing enough, but they are doing a lot. And as individuals, or as if you're mentoring someone, you have to push that person to go and do that and take the first step, not wait for, not be in a traditional culture or waiting for the parent or the boss to tell us. We have to kind of take that into our own hands and take control of that. And if you don't shift the mindset of taking control of that, it's not going to happen because the companies eventually move on to the next person, right? There's going to be many other people who are willing to take advantage of the programs and invest in themselves and do the things that they need to.
And kind of on that note, I want to say, Buck, it is also your responsibility, right? What I mean is that everyone here has professional networks, and what each of us has the opportunity to cultivate a person or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, and the next awesome event that you're going to, invite that person. Introduce that person to 3 or 4 people when they're at the event, right? As Steve said, each one of us has the opportunity to be mentors. And so I think that we have to take that to heart. I don't think of it as people, it's not just a professional obligation, it's a personal fulfillment, right? And so I think that it is indeed each one of our responsibilities. Whether for me, I'm still mid-level. What I can do is help mentor college students, or high school students, or a junior high student, right? Or someone younger at my office, and I do that actively. And so I call upon each of you, and all 3 of us, I think, are calling upon each of you to do the same.
Can I make one comment? Okay. So one thing you can do, for example, is something I did at Cisco, which was I became the executive sponsor for the Internal Asian Network, and basically did 2 things. Number one, I refocused from being a party organization to be a professional development organization. Okay. If you look at most ERGs, a lot of what they do is that. The other thing you can do is make important point that it isn't that there must be funding. So the other thing I did is get more funding for the ERG. So those are 2 specific things you can do to get your company to focus on the problem. Because unless they understand it and focus on it, it'll always just be a party organization, a social organization.
Yes.
Short use of Zach with Chevron. I was struck by something that my good friend Anna Mock said, which is that Asians are not seen as a minority. And we had a discussion prior to this panel, I don't know if you were here, about our conversation with search firms at the very highest level, meaning board seats. And there are very few Asians on boards in the Fortune 500. And the answer that we get from folks like Russell Reynolds and Deloitte, not Deloitte, but other search firms, and you know who they are, is we never get asked for Asians. And the question that I have is there a perception in the searches that you conduct that Asians are overrepresented, or they're not selected, or they're not really minorities? And what are you doing to combat that, Laurie, given the fact that you said there's an acute understanding that this is something that needs to be addressed? Are Asians being excluded because of that perception?
That's a tough question. Thank you for asking. My immediate response is no, they're not being excluded. However, I think there is a need to educate about the paucity of leadership opportunities, and to look at corporate boards to say, because we are asked constantly, not only in terms of functional and professional expertise, but to help create boards that are representative of society, much less senior leadership teams. So my sense is there may be more pressure for other types of diversity, but I think it's a matter of education. And I don't know, and I would have to look at to see if there's been a report done and publicized lately to say, here's the reality. And because I think maybe it's time to shine some attention on that.
I think on this issue, we have to shift our thinking, right? So much of thinking is tied to general population numbers.
Yeah.
So the Asians are 5 to 6%, right? Around close to 6% of total US population. So if we keep benchmarking corporate advancement of Asians in companies and in schools against that benchmark, we will always look overrepresented. But the reality is we're graduating the most people from universities, the most are entering the workforce, the world is more global, so we have to actually educate on shifting that thinking. Was a benchmark traditional, as you know, right? Benchmark is around general population. We look at that when I look at the other communities, and there are gaps in those other communities against general population. So whatever we can do, I think, as a community to drive that, and the data is really hard to come by, I think is part of shifting that mindset.
And I would also say, just one further response is, I think I can only speak for our search firm. I wouldn't presume to speak for the others. But the conversation is not about diversity. It's about creating a culture that's inclusive, that recognizes, that is sophisticated around these issues. And I think we have invested ourselves in that effort. We've created a diversity and inclusion practice. And I think our conversation, not only internally and reflecting on ourselves, much less looking at our clients, is evolving. There's work to be done. And I think, however, that this is going to be a really interesting next 5 years as everybody deepens that effort.
If I may, so I have a perspective. I don't know whether it's politically correct to say that, but I believe things follow money. You know, the force that shape environment, shift society, ultimately comes to where the money goes. And if you look at right now, I mean, Asian American has 6% of the U.S. population. Total number is still small. I mean, 6%, right? It's 1 out of 17. But right now we're seeing this a sudden representation or need of representation for Asian American. Why? It's not because in the United States, nothing really happened. I mean, it's great. We grow from 4% to 6% in the past 30 years. It's really from China and India. It's the global economy. And if we as a group really want to pivot the economic force, we have to do it in sort of a roundabout way. Bind our relationship, synergize our relationship, our connection network in China, synergize our relation network in India. And when the market demands that representation, we need to have more Indian, we need to have more Chinese American to represent the company that serve those country. They're gonna cost. They're gonna cost, right? So that's just something I'm thinking.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sydney Kohara, one of the co-chairs here and also on the advisory board. But when we talk about the next generation Asian leaders, it's very commendable, all the large companies who have all of these programs, or you can afford to bring these people in to help. Annabel, you talk about presentation. In fact, that book is great. I think I wrote the blurb on the back, that brag, the art of tooting your own horn without bragging. But one of the things I want to ask you, there are a lot of people who maybe are not in large companies. And this is part of what we're doing today. Asia Society in Northern California holds dozens of programs and get-togethers with people. When you talk about the next generation and how maybe they need to have some skills that they don't have now, and maybe they aren't in the company that can share these, what kind of program, if you look back on your careers, would you like to see, say, Asia Society put on that might have helped you as you were coming up the ranks and might help that those next generation Asian leaders or global leaders? What kind of program would you like to see that so many in here, and I see a lot of youthful faces, could be a part of with Asia Society? How could we help?
So one of the great things that I experienced when I was first in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill was I was probably about 22, 23, and at the time I was there during a Republican-controlled Congress in the Bush administration, and so there was probably, I would say, 40 or 50 Asian American legislative staffers that I knew. I recognized them by their faces walking around Capitol Hill. And what we did was we actually, a group of us gathered together during lunch, and just so that we could get to know each other because it was such a small world. The second was, in being at that lunch, I learned about community opportunities and leadership opportunities. So at 23, 24, I was able to join a board of directors for a national Asian American leadership group. That I would never have had that opportunity had I not just gone to that lunch. And I looked forward to the lunch. It was great to vent and share gossip and things like that. But those are things, so what I would say, call upon the Asia Society to do is just actually convening young Asian Americans together just so they get to know each other and they have this shared interest. And then if there are community groups that are looking for more board members, looking for committee chairs, that's where you develop those early leadership skills. And maybe you have 5 or 6 visiting groups come in and share, hey, we're actually looking for an event chair, we're actually looking for a blah, blah, blah chair, and we need your help. Who would like this leadership opportunity?
Which, by the way, Asia Society does have a young leadership program that is very, very active. In fact, Brian Reyes this afternoon will be speaking, and he's a big, big part of that. So if any of you are interested, and they do get together, and they do fun things like go have cocktails and programs. But again, any ideas from all of you of what you might have participated in for all of these individuals?
I think we have, I'm sorry, please.
So I think Asia Society, the programs done are amazing, and we have Ascend that also has programs, and we've partnered with Asia Society on a lot of these for the young folks. But Cindy, your question really made me think about what is that one thing. One thing, and I see this also when we do international exchanges, is if there was something that helps us demystify how to socialize with people who are not like ourselves. And I'll pause for a minute. So, I'll talk about drinking, because last night I went drinking with some of our staff. And we all can drink when we're all kind of similar in terms of what we drink and how we drink. But we're not always with people who like to drink. Or we Asians love food, so we can all go and talk about food, but we're not also with people who love to eat, right? So the reality of you're working in a very diverse environment, we're working with people who grew up very differently than us, who center their social life. They might be big-time golfers. Well, if I don't golf, how do I connect with them? And really demystify that and open it up and bring it down to as basic a level of how humans connect. So my friend Shark and I are huge foodies. That's what we connect over, right? We send each other pictures, we talk about our travel food, but with someone else, we don't talk about food at all. We might be talking about scotch, because that's what I drink and that's what he drinks, right? but someone else could be something else. But I think how we kind of demystify that human connection, because ultimately, why someone recommends me for something is we had some kind of connection, and it's not only something over something social, but that connection led us to have a mutual interest to learn about how we would respond under stress, how we would work together. And that person knows how I might respond if there's a job opportunity and can recommend me to something. But they have to have that kind of connection with me beyond what's on paper. And so how we kind of connect with people that are so different than us, whether in age, culture, work experiences, and really kind of dig into that. I think it's something I wish I had learned much earlier in my career. It would have probably helped me, right, have a much bigger and deeper network than I do now.
So I am going to apologize, Stephen, because apparently we need to bring this to a close, and I know a number of you have questions, so my apologies. What I would encourage you to do is seek out our panelists after this event and ask them their questions. I want to thank each of you for your contributions. I've learned something here today. I hope all of you have. And I think these are issues that we all have to keep engaging with and in. And thank you for your generosity of time and spirit. So much appreciated.